Greetings everyone, and welcome to this thrilling edition of Ask Shane Anything right here on Sifted Games at sifted.net. I'm Shane Satterfield, the host of this awesome Q&A that we do every week, and the founder of Sifted, and we're here because a lot of you are pledging at $7 or more per month at patreon.com/sifted. Now, if you pledge at our normal $4 tier that gets you all our content early, you still get to ask questions, but the people who are pledging at that higher tier, they get priority. I think everyone can get that. Anyway, we have another awesome selection of questions. Thanks to you guys. Let's get to them. Okay, our first question for this week's edition comes from Bachby. Provided the tariffs go away and we are in a more economically stable situation relatively soon, will the PS5 Pro end up selling as well as PS4 Pro? Why do you think Sony hasn't marketed the console harder and focused on its technical superiority? Alright, Bachby, well, we did get some good news overnight, and that is that the courts have stepped in and determined that Trump's tariffs are unconstitutional and illegal. Just like anyone with half a brain who could read the Constitution could have told you all along. Now, here's the thing. The markets haven't really reacted to that news, and I don't know this for a fact, but I'm guessing it's because they just simply don't believe that the Trump administration is going to adhere to the rule of law. It has ignored court orders before. It basically just doesn't give a crap about anything America stands on or has been founded on, and the market recognizes that and probably just believes that they're going to ignore the court's ruling and start slapping tariffs all over the place all over again. I mean, I really thought that today the market was going to skyrocket. I really thought it was going to rip, and it has done basically nothing today. So that tells you all you need to know about what investors think about this. So let's get back to your question. And you may be asking why I'm focusing on tariffs so much, because that is why all this is happening. So first of all, PlayStation isn't completely innocent in all this because, look, it should have known that Trump probably was going to screw with things and mess things up and probably start levying tariffs because he talked about it over and over on the campaign trail. So as soon as he won, you knew what he was going to do. He was going to issue these insane tariffs. And that is what has happened. So it is a little bit of unfortunate timing for PlayStation because, look, they couldn't have figured out 3.5 years ago or whenever they started working on PS5 Pro that 3 years later, Americans were going to lose their minds and elect a criminal to be president. But at the same time, they should have accounted for that at least a little bit. So the timing for PS5 Pro is terrible because it's $700 and now there's tariffs that are driving the price of everything up. So right now people are on guard and they're very conscious of how much things cost. People are trying to look to see what the tariffs are actually doing. Now, as I mentioned, I think in last week's episode of Ask Shane Anything, we figured this stuff out way earlier because we love electronics. And so we've been seeing what it's been doing to PC stuff, to console prices, to just parts to build almost any piece of electronics. We're in this, so we saw this coming. We knew this was happening. The average consumer still has no clue. And it appears the PlayStation didn't have any clue either. So the timing for PS5 Pro's launch could not have been any worse. Will things go back to normal? I don't know, Bachby. Look, if a court issues an order today saying that the tariffs are BS and they're wiped out and the market doesn't react to it, I think smart people are starting to realize that nothing is going to go back to normal until Trump is gone. So, no. I don't think the PS5 Pro has a chance to sell as well as the PS4 Pro, and that's not a very high bar to clear. Globally, PS4 Pro represents 25%, around roughly, 25% of the total PS4 sold all around the globe, globally, as I said. Will PS5 Pro get to that? No way. No way at all. Again, you're going to lose at least the next 2 or 3 years of being able to be aggressive with the pricing on that thing. It's doomed. It's really doomed. A PlayStation is going to lose a ton of money on the PS5 Pro, and I don't know that there's anything it can do about it now. If it knew that this was coming, what should it have done? Well, it probably should have priced PS5 Pro cheaper, or it should have just bailed on it until it was more financially and fiscally responsible. I appreciate it went ahead with it, because for people who have a PS5 Pro, they absolutely love it. So I get why you're asking this question. And then the second part of your question is, why hasn't Sony marketed the PS5 Pro harder? I honestly think it just wants to shove it under the rug. I don't think it wants consumers to really know, except for the hardcore who knew the price as soon as they announced it and were like, okay, that's cool. I want a PS5 Pro. I can sell my old PS5 to get a PS5 Pro. It doesn't care about those people. It cares about the casuals. And if you start marketing the PS5 Pro on the NHL playoffs, the NBA playoffs, people start looking into the PS5 Pro and they're like, oh my God, it's $700. That's bad PR for PlayStation. So the PS5 Pro is kind of screwed. I really don't know what PlayStation could do at this point to save it. The hope is that eventually over time the component costs for the console go down and Sony can at least lower the cost of it enough to offset the tariffs. I don't know. Look, we're in uncharted territory. No president has been dumb enough to try this for like 100 years because the last president that did this sent us into the Great Depression. And so anyone who's even moderately intelligent would be like, gee, I probably shouldn't do that. So we're in uncharted territory here. He's a loose cannon that wakes up every day. He doesn't think about anything beyond what's happening right at that moment. And I think the markets are reacting to that, and unfortunately, it is really screwed Sony and PS5 Pro. Okay, our next question for this week's episode comes from Ben. Hey Shane, hope you're doing well. I'm a huge fan of the bass guitar, and I noticed a bass in the last episode when you showed us your DJ setup. Have you done much playing over the years? What sort of music do you play? Were you influenced by any bassists in particular? Good eye, Ben. I have been playing the bass guitar since I was 17. Yep. So I was in... No, that's not true. I've been playing bass guitar since I was 18. So I was in a couple bands when I was in high school, just graduating high school. The first band was a hardcore punk band called Sprocket. I've actually posted videos of that band in this show before. I'll put a quick clip in right here. But anyway, I was only the singer in that band. And that band was great. Like, I really feel like we could have done something, but unfortunately we all graduated, our drummer went into the military and we broke up or whatever. So anyway, I then started a second band where I was, well, didn't start, but joined a band with a bunch of my friends where I was the bass player and the lead singer. So that's when I started playing bass, around 18-ish. And for the next few years, I got really good at playing bass. I was obsessed with it, and obviously we were performing on stage. I had to be good. I didn't want to embarrass myself on stage. So I was really good at playing bass guitar. Then I discovered electronic music and I started DJing, and the bass guitar just fell by the wayside. Instead of worrying about being in bands and things like that, I was worried about my DJ career and becoming a DJ. It was so much easier to be a DJ than it was to be in a band. You didn't have to haul your gear around and then set it all up and do the show and then tear it all down. I would just show up with a record box and play for a couple hours and make 4 times the money I made being in a band. So anyway, I switched over to DJing. However, I don't know, about 7 or 8 years ago, I decided I wanted to pick up the bass again and start playing again. And so I asked for one for my birthday and my wife got it for me. And so I've been playing, not a lot since I got it, honestly. I haven't played it as much as I thought I would. I think what deterred me is that when I started playing it again, it had been a big gap. I felt like I had to learn the bass guitar all over again. I know it's crazy, but I could hardly play any songs. I couldn't play any songs from my second band all the way through. I couldn't remember it. And so I feel like I'm kind of learning it all over again. I'm retraining my hands still. So I kind of use it for fun here and there. In fact, you can hear it in the outro song for Game Face. I play bass in that. Anyway, my interest in bass has waned over time. I have one to fiddle around with. I don't use it all that often. Now back to the other part of your question, which is what are bass players that I admire or model my style after or whatever. That is an easy question for me. There's one person to mention there, and that is Peter Hook. Peter Hook is the bass player, or was, of Joy Division and then of New Order. He has since been estranged from the band, so New Order still exists, and he's not in it. They have some dude playing bass there who's nowhere near as good as Peter Hook. But anyway, if you don't know who Peter Hook is, he was revolutionary. Not because he was a great bass player, but because of the bass lines that he wrote. So Joy Division and New Order, a lot of the melodies in their songs are driven by Peter Hook's bass. Instead of the guitar or a keyboard like most rock music, Peter Hook's bass drives the melodies for those band songs, and he also uses a pedal on his bass guitar that makes it sound unlike any other bass in rock music. And I have attempted to try to replicate that sound. I have a bass pedal called a clone that's supposed to closely represent Peter Hook's sound. It doesn't really, though. So I don't admire Peter Hook because he's the best bass player that ever lived. That would probably be Geddy Lee or someone like that. I admire him because he looked at the bass guitar in a different way and realized that it could lead the band. So Peter Hook is my favorite bassist of all time. However, there are so many others that I have so much respect for that I've admired throughout the years. Flea, obviously when I was in my early punk rock hardcore stage, and I was playing bass. I've tried to model Flea, however, I do not play slap bass. And I know that guy Davey54 or whatever on YouTube will give me a slap for not playing bass by slapping. I play with a pick. So Flea didn't influence me that much because he slaps, he doesn't play with a pick. So Flea is one. Les Claypool, also just an amazing bass player. And again, I think he plays with his fingers. I don't think he plays with a pick either. But he's just incredible. He plays for Primus. If you've heard any of their songs, there's nothing that stands out more in their songs than Les Claypool's bass lines. So Les Claypool, definitely a big fan. Like Cliff Burton from Metallica, who died. He was kind of the first really, truly great metal bass player. I have a lot of love for him. And obviously he died in a tragic accident. And then as I mentioned earlier, Geddy Lee, probably, if I'm looking for the technical player, he's probably the person I would point to, the bass player for Rush. So those are some of my influences, kind of, but really, it's Peter Hook from New Order and Joy Division. Okay, our next question comes from Shadowist. Do you think that Jade Raymond left of her own accord from Haven Studios? And if so, why? Yeah, I've realized that I've talked about this a couple times, and I've never really said how I feel about this. Whether I think that she left on her own accord or whether she was fired, so to speak. Here's the weird thing about this whole situation is that Jade formed Haven Studios before it was purchased. So she started a studio with her friends and was like, hey, let's start working on games together. And once the industry caught wind that Jade had started a new studio, a bidding war began for Jade's services. And PlayStation came in and was like, hey, what are you guys working on? And she's like, hey, we're thinking about working on this heist game as a service. And PlayStation is like, perfect. That's all we want to make going forward is games as a service. It was a match made in heaven. She had a great reputation, a great pedigree, and on and on. So they buy Haven Studios, the studio that she created on her own independently with her friends and coworkers that she wanted to work with. So fast forward, they show off Fair Games, their game. The whole games as a service strategy falls apart for PlayStation, and here we are where we are right now. So, did PlayStation fire her? Was it a move that PlayStation made because it's bailing on its games as a service strategy? Or did Jade just become disenfranchised and feel like she needed to leave the studio that she founded, I would add again? And that's kind of where I'm coming out on this at this point. I think that it may have been a mutual decision, but more than likely, PlayStation was putting pressure on her and saying that, like, what you're doing isn't good enough and maybe you need to pick it up. Or, you know, maybe it was just like, hey, we're thinking about bailing on this stuff. Your game needs to be incredible. And again, according to reporting, there was an alpha for the game. Other people finally got to play it, and it did not go well. They got bad feedback from that, and maybe that was when PlayStation came to her and was like, look, you need to do something. It could just even be a case where PlayStation came to her and was like, you need to get rid of the lead designer or some other person who is working underneath her. And she's like, no, those are my people, and I wanted to work with them. There could be a million things that happened, but ultimately, I do not believe that it was 100% her decision to leave because, again, I know her pretty well, or at least I used to, and she's a good person. I mean, she formed a studio with her friends, and that's what she wanted to do, and I cannot believe that she would screw over her friends and her colleagues that she respects. I just don't believe it. And so I do think that mostly she was pushed out the door by PlayStation and left the studio that she founded. Now, the good news is, I'm sure she got a nice payout when the studio was sold to PlayStation. I'm sure she was collecting a very nice salary. I'm sure she is going to get an incredible golden parachute, and I'm sure there will be other publishers lining up for her services. Probably not as many as last time, but there will be some for sure. So I think ultimately everything ends up okay for her. I just don't believe that she would go through the process of starting a studio with the people that she wants to work with and cares about, and then just bail on them at the first sign of trouble. I just don't believe it. All right, our last question for this week's episode comes from iViz. Hi Shane, founding member here. Awesome, thank you, man. But I've never asked you a question. What do you know about Poland in general? Not only game studios, etc., although that would be a core for my question, but also about its culture, food, and history. Do you know any game devs from there? Have you ever interviewed them personally? Would you consider going there for holiday? Well, iViz, I actually know Polish culture very, very well. My wife is 100% Polish, and her family immigrated here and were like coal miners and steel workers in the Pittsburgh area, put their foothold down, and off they went. And so the other thing about it is that my wife's family celebrates their Polish heritage. They're not a Polish family that's just like, oh, we're from Poland, but we're really Americans. They celebrate their heritage, and that is great for me because you asked about food, and oh my gosh, Polish food is so good. Her mom makes homemade pierogies that are just absolutely delicious. They make homemade kalaki cookies. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Just incredible. I don't like sauerkraut and some of the other Polish food that they make, but most of it is absolutely incredible. They still speak in Polish around the house at times. Like her older relatives speak a lot around the house at times at the holidays. They still tell stories about their family immigrating from Poland. Yes. I have never been there personally. My wife went on a vacation there with a friend of hers a few years ago to go back and see like the little town that her family was from and blah, blah, blah. So it's odd that you're asking this. I know a lot about Poland and Polish culture. Would I ever go there? I'm getting to the point where I'm getting pretty old and I got to be picky about the places that I go. I've spent a lot of time in Europe. I've traveled all over Europe. I have not made it to Eastern Europe yet. Do I have any interest in going to Russia? No, none, zero. At least now, while Putin's still alive, maybe when he's gone someday, I'll have an interest in going there. And I think that would be the draw for me to go to Eastern Europe, would be to go to like Moscow and then hit a bunch of other countries in that same geographical area. So I haven't been there. Have I interviewed Polish developers? Maybe somewhere along the way. I've never interviewed CD Projekt Red. And they're the one that probably most people would say, that's the big Polish developer. So I don't know if I have, actually. I don't remember interviewing one, but it's possible. I've literally conducted like thousands of interviews throughout my career. So it is possible that one of the studios I did an interview with was from Poland. I just don't remember it. So anyway, interesting that you brought this up. I love Polish food. I love Polish culture. I love Polish people. And I love my wife. Okay, that's it for this week's edition of Ask Shane Anything. Thanks to everyone for asking questions. And we are out of questions again. So please head to SIFTD.net. Go to the header, click on the link there to go to our forums and ask me a question. You can ask about whatever you want. Now, if you pledge at that Ask Shane tier at $7 or more per month, then you get priority in asking questions. Everybody gets to watch the archive on day one, even if you're just pledging at that $4 tier where you get all our content early. You get to watch this show at the same time as everybody else. So thanks everyone for the great questions. We'll see you next week.